Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. Joining me today is founder and editor of Uncaptured Media, Dan Cohen, and Kim Ives, the English language editor of Haiti Liberté, to discuss the history around Haiti, U.S. intervention, Western intervention, and the overlapping discussion of what we've been seeing around this odd story of Haitian immigrants eating animals, something that actually overlaps with a story that Dan covered before this around Jimmy Barbecue and the kind of rising resistance in the country being framed as cannibals, and really kind of breaking this weird story down and highlighting on what the background is and maybe why this story is there. So thank you, Dan and Kim, for joining today. How are you both?
Great.
Doing good. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Yeah, my pleasure. I think this is an important story that obviously you've both been touching on long before this kind of weird anomaly of eating animals and cannibalism and accusations of all sorts of different things. So I think it's important to kind of start where, I mean, obviously there's a long history, as you've mentioned in the past, going back to 1804 and before, but starting in, the relevance of U.S. or just Western intervention. So let's start there in general. And really, I'll kind of throw my questions at whoever wants to jump in. And so I'd like to start with whoever would like to start on the kind of the history of Western intervention in Haiti and what point you feel is relevant to, the current U.S. mindset and really the stories we're talking about today.
Dan, you want to?
Well, I'll just say really quickly, maybe before we dive into the history. I mean, it's we're like creeping. We have this ongoing intervention, military intervention, really an invasion because it's not invited by any legitimate government in Haiti, and it's not really going as the empire would like. And I've been saying, like, for months, I've been saying to Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, I don't know if you remember this, but it seems like something that's much more suited for a Trump administration because it's harder for Democrats and liberals to be like openly racist. You have like the whole strategy of the their like PR strategy is basically to elevate Black people into to be the faces of the empire. Karine Jean-Pierre being the perfect example, White House press secretary, who is of Haitian origin herself. And so, you need, with a country like Haiti, the way you have to incite against it in order to prepare the public for further intervention, invasion, is much more suited for a Trump administration. And that's like, I think what we're seeing going back to the cannibal slur back in, what was that, March, where they were saying, Haiti is a country of cannibals led by this guy, Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier, who's called barbecue because he's a cannibal and he's a leader of a cannibal gang. And now this current thing about Haitians eating cats. So, but yes, there's a long history of, how kind of Haiti occupies the, American imagination and how it's been kind of portrayed in American, not only American, but I'm sure French media too, about a nation of savages, to basically cover up the reality that it's actually a nation of former slaves who accomplished one of the greatest feats in human history, which is to have a revolution against the slavers. And then go on to defeat 3 empires. So, right. I mean, in a nutshell, that's what my sense of it. But go ahead, Kim.
Right, and really, Haiti has been dealing with foreign intervention since its birth 220 years ago. It actually won its revolution because the British, French, and Spanish were fighting over it. It's a very strategic piece of land in the middle of the Caribbean, right on the Windward Passage, and they all wanted it. They all wanted its fertile ground, which made it the richest colony in the Western Hemisphere. It was much richer than the 13 colonies of North America, and was really what made France. And so after the 1804 revolution, when the slaves, first and last successful slave revolution in history, throughout the French, it was basically besieged by all sorts of European and American expeditions, nipping at its heels, if you will. In 1825, the French sent a whole fleet down to basically force them to sign what's called the independence debt. They had to pay 150 million gold francs, which at that time was an astronomical sum. And that was part of the impoverishment of the country. But, this picture, you have to realize the momentous nature of the Haitian Revolution. In a way, I argue that it was even more momentous than the American or French or Russian or Chinese Revolution. It's one of the great neglected revolutions because it changed everything here. And often I say that Haiti is the polar opposite of the United States. The United States is the richest nation in the world currently, which was founded by slave holders. It was basically founded to preserve slavery because England was starting to move away from it. But they said, no, we want to keep these slaves. It helps us grow our cotton. And the Haitians founded the second nation in the hemisphere, which was founded by self-freed slaves. And they basically were the first ones to end slavery. Their revolution trumpeted the beginning of the end of chattel slavery. So they were just a monster ever since then for the U.S. ruling class. Every boat that came from Haiti to any port in the U.S. was basically quarantined. So the word of the Haitian Revolution wouldn't get out and spread among the slave masses that were
Interesting.
Yeah. So Haiti has always been a kind of pariah, and this goes all through the 19th century. There were Germans and French and English. There were many episodes of sort of gunboat diplomacy and little skirmishes, but it didn't really it wasn't really captured by U.S. imperialism until 1915 when, and this was in the period when the U.S. was doing this around the world, U.S. Marines landed. They took over the country, basically became the government for 19 years, from 1915 to 1934. And then they put in place the army of Haiti, what was called the Garde Nationale d'Haïti, the National Guard of Haiti, which basically were their surrogate army. And that continued really up until we can say 1991. When Jean-Bertrand Aristide, a liberation theologian, anti-imperialist priest, came to power. And boy, once again, this was just as bad as the Haitian Revolution the first time. The U.S. went, berserk. And in fact, rightly so, because this was really the beginning of the pink tide. For the first time, the Haitians showed that you could win a U.S. engineered election. And they did it, and that's when Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and Evo Morales in Bolivia and Lula in Brazil, et cetera, said, hey, maybe we could do the same thing. And that started the whole, we could say, pink tide across Latin America. So ever since then, the U.S., in that 1991 period, the U.S. has been invading Haiti and then passing it off to a proxy force. In the case of the 94 intervention, they passed it off to the UN after 3 months. In the case of the 2004 intervention, they passed it off to the UN after 3 months. But this time in 2024, they're giving it directly to the proxy. It's the Kenyans going in. And it's not working out too well. And they're going back their mandate for this MSS, as it's called, the Multinational Security Support Mission. It expires on October 2nd. And so now they're running back to the Security Council, hoping they can get a UN peacekeeping mission, because basically they have no compulsory way to make anybody come and take part of it. They were expecting 2,500 troops in Haiti. Right now they have 380. And even those troops aren't going out of their barracks. So, they can't pay them. They're out of money. They don't even have ammunition because it's all going to Ukraine and to Gaza. And so it's turning into a real mess. And so that's basically, in a nutshell, the history of foreign intervention in Haiti.
It's so infuriating to see these people scream about democracy and rights and rules-based order while this has just been such an obvious track record. I'm sure you both agree with that. Just felt like saying that. But what I wanted to, before we go any further in the other stories we talk about, I wanted to go back and thank you for in very detailed. And I hope people will take the time to look at your work and the background and how obvious it is this has been going on. But Dan, what you said there about the Trump administration being more conducive for this. When you say that, am I sensing that you feel that in some way that's more of a coordinated concept, or can you flesh that out for me and why you think that's the idea?
Well, definitely there is, of course, the uniparty, permanent Washington, what, maybe you call the deep state, the permanent war machine, that regardless of who occupies the White House, there is an agenda at play. And, we talk about what's called the Global Fragility Act. That is a piece of legislation that is very much one of the cornerstones of U.S. foreign policy right now around the world, or at least that's the idea of the State Department, Pentagon planners, and the Global Fragility Act. The other day I called it the what did I call it? Like the empire's fragility, the crumbling empire act. Is basically that in the age of resurgent Russia and China and global competition from the big baddies, the U.S. And the bifurcation of the global economy with this Cold War with China, the U.S. wants to reassert its dominance in neocolonies in small countries, and actually the State Department's memos and public writing on the Global Fragility Act says that this is actually the plan for the whole world. This isn't just for a few countries here or there, but basically the idea is to sort of bring State Department and Pentagon and USAID all together to streamline them. And so, instead of different hands operating independently and they don't know what they're doing, it's more effective, with an emphasis on the military aspect. And Haiti is the test case for this. So Haiti is the first case they want to apply this to. And then they want to apply it to Libya, another place the U.S. has left a trail of destruction. And then several countries in West Africa, in French-speaking West Africa, which, if you consider what's happened over the past 2 years, the series of revolutions in some of those countries, well, you could see that they were correctly concerned that there was lack of stability under the regimes that the U.S. and France had installed and backed. And another country I believe they're looking at was they have Papua New Guinea and Mozambique. That's right. So basically, this strategy was passed by Congress in 2019 when Trump was still president. And then it was continued when Biden came into the presidency. And so, this is the stuff that probably Trump has never heard of, the Global Fragility Act. Biden doesn't know what this is. It's just built in to the system.
Right.
And so when, this planning for what we show, for example, in our documentary, Another Vision Inside Haiti's Uprising, is that, this process plays out across the in a bipartisan way. And so this process of leading towards, building towards a U.S. intervention or a U.S. orchestrated intervention into Haiti. And of course, a lot of it has to do with, the geopolitical and domestic factors that can prevent them from deploying forces or proxy forces into Haiti, namely China and Russia and their opposition at the Security Council, et cetera, et cetera. And domestically, being able to sell basically a war to the American public. And so the point that I was making is, how much of it is intentional and planned out, I don't really know, but I think there's sort of an organic process that's not necessarily like conspiratorial It's just like when you have, Karine Jean-Pierre and Linda Thomas Greenfield at the UN, and because basically the U.S. has this obvious strategy to put Black people as its spokespeople, then it's not so easy for them to use this obviously racist incitement and play into these tropes. They need to talk about stability and, helping Haitians, and, we want to bring prosperity and these kinds of things. And that's the cover that they use. Whereas a Trump administration, we all know how Trump is. He's, he plays, of course, to the right wing, which is less concerned with appearing racist or, we've seen with JD Vance and Trump and, the Elon Musk and the countless social media influencers that have become prominent. They're more than happy to deploy these tropes about Haitians eating cats and dogs. And, this is actually just part of the whole election. They think this is going to help Trump win the election, which to me, it seems like pretty weak strategy. That maybe if you're a very online person, I guess, but in terms of overall appealing to, the kind of undecided voter that's not sure if Kamala or Trump is actually better. And, as terrible as Kamala is, Trump didn't look particularly strong at that last debate. So I don't think that's going to grow his base. It's just red meat for his base, is what I think. And so the immigration issue that is kind of underlying this is very real, and there are real questions about that. But the strategy that the Trump team and Elon Musk and has taken, I think is misguided, but is in terms of winning an election. But it is very useful for ginning up antipathy towards Haiti and Haitians to get support for some kind of expanded U.S. military presence or proxy force into Haiti.
Right. And that goes to your uniparty point that this is, really how we have to view this. It goes back and forth, teeter-totter, or, whatever, kind of like, distilling it down into one ultimate point. And so we'll come back to the animals and in general and the overlapping points within that. But I want to ask you about the Global Fragility Act. So what you're essentially saying is that this would be the typical U.S. foreign policy act, where under the guise of saying we're trying to help people who are in a destabilized position, pointing out that they're the ones that put them or drove them into that position, but ultimately wouldn't do that at all. I mean, this is sort of like another form of occupation. Is that what you're saying? Like using this act to facilitate control over these countries under the guise of helping them?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the whole thing is just basically how are we going to, in this new era of moving on from the war on terror, now we're into global competition with major powers who have an alternative paradigm, whether that's Russia's military footprint around the world, which is obviously a challenge to the U.S. So-called rules-based order, or China's Belt and Road Initiative, which is offers a mutually beneficial paradigm, which is completely the opposite of the U.S.'s like zero-sum game. Right. That we're going to basically control your country and own it. And if you don't like that, we'll just burn it down. So in that, facing that paradigm where more and more countries or political and social movements are thinking, hey, maybe there's an alternative to, good old imperialism. The U.S. is I think becoming desperate in a way where it, is going to look for ways to impose its control. I mean, the fact that it calls the globe fragile, global fragility, to me, fragility just says weakness. It's projecting weakness. I mean, I think it's just, we're gonna help you, which is, kind of a scary term these days.
Especially coming from the United States government with their obvious track record, right?
Exactly.
Well, I think that's important to highlight, with what Kim was highlighting in the buildup and the idea that this is just, I'm seeing this a lot, by the way. And if there's an opening to get into this more, we can, like with that, what I see with like Honduras and this weird field-backed Prospera fake libertarian utopia, or any number of things I keep seeing where there's like this new form of governance almost poking its head out in these different, like you said, this is sort of a trial in regard to see how this will apply. So I want to bring this back to one of the points around this where I feel like, at least in my opinion, I saw a shift in the way that this was the foreign policy Kim was highlighting was being conducted. And I think that might relate to this new direction. So Kim, if you could touch more on the point in which like the earthquake forward Clinton Foundation, the way that they abused like the aid state of all of this, which really did set up a whole new kind of form of manipulation, which was already being used, but it exploded, I think, after that in a large way, using as James Corbett would call it, the Trojan horse of regime change, like USAID and National Endowment for Democracy. So can you touch on that time frame for me and your thoughts on whether that was sort of a new direction, or your thoughts on that?
Okay.
Real quick, let me interrupt you, Kim, before you start, because maybe you want to add this in. Maybe you want to talk about what you showed in your award-winning film, Bitter Cane, how basically the U.S. what that was about, what that era was about, because I mean, this obviously didn't start with 2010 and the earthquake. I mean, this goes back to the shaping and the basically creation of the Haitian economy and the picture of neoliberal economics. But sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, well, just to kind of go back to the Trump and versus Harris situation we're facing now. To me, they're two different sectors. The Democrats are essentially the globalist sector. They're looking at the planet. They're taking planetary strategies, whereas Trump is more of a nationalist. And so I don't think he would have gone in for an MSS. This is too much. He's like direct. He would have said, send in the 82nd Airborne, nuke the place, whatever you have to do. So that would have been his approach. But the globalists are trying to, they're looking at all the chess pieces on the board. So they're trying to get Haiti and Kenya and Mozambique, Benin, Guyana, all these different, they're nudging them, moving them around. That's what Blinken's running around like a fireman, trying to put out fires and move people here and there, not very successfully. And they've been hoisted by their own petard because, the crisis is going faster than they can get firemen out there. So it's like in the case of Haiti, they want to send Kenyans to stabilize Haiti, and Kenya starts to destabilize. And, the same problems that are happening in Haiti are beginning to erupt in Kenya. So the empire is sort of at a loss how to go forward. And Trump's approach is, to me, to go very straight at it in terms of almost like, I don't know, Teddy Roosevelt, send in the Marines, do whatever we have to do. He's not worried about the hypocritical problem that the Democrats are trying to avoid. And the reason they're using Kenyans and sending Kenyans in there is because they don't want it to look like 1915. In 1915, the U.S. Marines landed about 6 months before they landed. They went in and they took all Haiti's gold, $500,000 worth of gold bars out of the bank, and they took them to the First National City Bank in New York, where they still are, as a matter of fact. And the Marines came in on July 28th, 1915, and they just took over the place. And they said, okay, well, we got to get a president to invite us. And so then they put in a guy, Sudar Tiganov, and he invited them. They don't want to do that again. It's too ugly. They don't want to send in U.S. Marines and then have the president who's put in place invite in the Global Fragility Act. They're trying, the Democrats again, the globalists are trying to have proxies do it. They're going to put in the government. That government will then invite the U.S. and the U.S. Oh, well, okay, sure, we'll do it. We'll sign the bilateral deal. So this is the whole dynamic. In a way, Clinton, just going to your question about Clinton and the earthquake, was kind of almost a test run, a dress rehearsal.
Right.
Because here was the earthquake, which was perfect timing for the empire. Some people say they made the earthquake happen. I would buy that. But, the timing was perfect because basically there'd been 20 years of Aristide and his sort of clone, a guy called René Préval, who'd been running Haiti since 91 to 2011, it was basically an alternance of Preval and Aristide Preval. And of course, with the coup periods interspersed, because there were 2 coups during that period. So now they said, oh, this is perfect. So in came Bill Clinton. He took over the country. He was basically ruled the country for 18 months. And they installed Michel Martelly, and they thought, okay, this is working out great. We're going to get our people in and, we'll set up the things the way we want it. But it kind of once again went off the rails, because this very complex machinery that the globalists are using can the more complex it is, the more possibility for problems. So in came Jovenel Moïse. He was sort of bollocksed up, I could say, by Donald Trump, because what Trump did was he strengthened the sanctions against Venezuela. The money that was basically keeping Haiti afloat was a thing called the Petro-Caribe Fund, where basically Hugo Chavez said, we don't want you to have to go to the IMF. We'll give you money, and then you invest it. So Hugo Chavez started Petro-Caribe. 2006 was the start, but it really engaged in 2008 until 2018. And that was because Trump basically shut down through the banks the ability to transfer money between Haiti and Venezuela. So the whole thing came to a crashing halt. And now Jovenel Moïse was in trouble, and he had to find a way out of it. Trump wasn't really helping him, and in the end, he ended up veering back towards Venezuela and Russia, and that's when they sent in a team. As far as we're concerned, all the circumstances seem to point to that the U.S. gave a wink and a nod at the very least, if not some logistical support to this operation to assassinate him. So basically, the globalists are trying to build this complex tapestry, the Global Fragility Act. I mean, Trump signed off on it, but it wasn't his architects who did it. It was the globalists behind the scene who run the deep state.
That's the uniparty for you right there.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, sorry. I mean, if you're done, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
That's about it. No, I mean, I'm not sure where we can go in a lot of directions here and look at the complexity, but the essence is there's a struggle in the ruling class. How are we going to preserve the U.S., which is in a free fall right now, as we all can see, as the world can see. And, are we going to end up going the Trump route, or are we end up going to go the Blinken, Sullivan, Newland route?
I would argue, and I definitely see the difference, but what I argue is that I see that being the way that the two-party illusion, as I would call it, always sort of works, which is they're very different in their directions, but they're designed to kind of just drive you down to one specific point that they, as the government, ultimately want you in, which is simply my opinion. But you're right to point out the very, very clear differences. But I always see how those two different things drive us in one clear direction. Like I always see it as this one linear line between administrations where we just kind of continue to see these same things happening. I wanted to ask about specifically, well, actually, since you brought it up, one quick point about the oil. Go ahead and say that the name, what was it again? The name?
Petro-Caribe.
Petro-Caribe. I've made points about this many times over the years, and I think it's important, if you could flesh that out just briefly, how important that was and how it shows that the idea being that it's somehow, what they call Iran or anybody else, leading state sponsors of terrorism or narco traffickers, all these claims they throw on it when they ignore all of their chief allies doing far more of it, but that this was something that was being done that was very explicitly helping the other countries that were also being suppressed and attacked by Western foreign policy. And by taking that away is one of the clear reasons, as well as stealing all of their gold. And clearly that could help these people as well. But it put them in that position, which is the point we already made. It's the creation of the destabilization then used to justify why the Fragility Act is even needed. So could you flesh that point out briefly for me on the oil Caribe?
Yeah, if I could just start, Dan. Yeah, the essence is from since I was a kid, when, all from the 60s, from 1959 until 2000, the big bugaboo in Latin America was Cuba. They were the target of everything. But when Hugo Chavez took over and basically hitched his wagon to Cuba, and Cuba in some way became, I could say, their eminence grise, the U.S. saw Venezuela as the real danger because of that petro gravitas that they have. And Hugo Chavez very sagely put it to good use by, delivering to all his neighbors this deal. Haiti got the sweetest, and he always said it was because Haiti basically helped liberate Venezuela. It was Haiti that gave Bolivar the guns, the boats, the printing presses, the soldiers to go liberate the continent. And you can see that in all the flags of northern South America. They have the Haitian flag in them. So he gave them the sweet deal of not only the cheap gas, but a loan account where they were able to keep 40% of the sales of the gas and invest it, so they didn't have to go to the IMF and World Bank and Inter-American Development Bank, etc. So all of that to say that the U.S. really was focusing on Venezuela as the principal problem they face. And that's to this day. We can see they're fighting tooth and nail, even though it's failed, it appears now, to demonize Maduro and get him out, because this South-South solidarity is the closest example of the new multipolar world threatening the empire.
Right. I mean, God forbid they should be helping each other or allowing people to not rely on these, whatever you want to call the Western control structure. It's just so frustrating. But so that's
Vampires.
why right. Yes. Right. And that's why that's so important to highlight, because this is the creation of, these are destabilizing tactics, and has no interest in the peoples of these countries whatsoever, which, the history shows, but the claims of everything, it really shows you that this is about, at the expense of the people they claim they're trying to help and for their own explicit interests. So let's bring this into the point about the immigration aspect, which clearly this opens the conversation for, this is a huge, it's always been a very clear wedge issue in this country, in the United States, but it's obviously kind of spun out of control more than ever. We did see the whole Venezuelan caravan conversation, which just seemed to vanish after the election, which I wonder if we're going to see a similar thing this time. But I want to talk about the idea of what I kind of called the U.S. foreign policy to immigration pipeline. And, in previous interviews, Dan, you've mentioned the idea of not just Haiti, but Venezuela. And I point to Honduras 2009 coup and the same concept. The idea is creating these immigration, this influx of immigration because of their foreign policy, and then either pointing to that as a reason the country is in chaos, or using that immigration, that influx in the United States or others in Europe, as a political tool. Right. So if you could touch on that and just the general idea of weaponized migration, and whether or not you think that is a part of what this is. And I don't mean just the clear example you've already made about the destabilization happening and kind of the byproduct, but whether it's being used for that purpose, like by design.
Yeah. I think immigration is basically, it is certainly intentional to destabilize countries, have their populations, or a significant portion of the populations leave the country, come to the United States in order to, perhaps, I think for the vast majority of people, basically to just find some kind of stability, some kind of income, and that's not a new thing. People have been immigrating to the United States for a long time. Often, maybe most examples are even seasonal, or people who want to work in the United States for a year or 2 or 5 and send money home, because even working menial jobs here, they can send money back to their families in whichever country in Latin America or wherever it may be, or save up money. But there's another kind of level of it, I guess, where the United States will intentionally destabilize countries in order to basically have a labor pool, to increase the labor pool and suppress wages domestically. So then there's more competition among the workers. They can get people, who are willing to work for less money and with less benefits and in worse conditions. So they can basically just increase their profits. And then there tends, what happens is inevitably there tends to be resentment from the domestic population here against those those migrant workers, and unfortunately that anger and that frustration should be directed at the policymakers who've destabilized their countries. But it's hard to expect your average Joe to understand the broader dynamics at play when he just sees a bunch of people who are not from there showing up in his town, and the conditions are getting worse, things are getting more expensive, there's inflation and war, and all of a sudden these new people are here. So what's going on? It must be that guy's fault. But there's in the past few years, definitely we've seen a geopolitical strategy play out where the U.S. encourages immigration from countries like Haiti, Venezuela, Nicaragua. If Kim, remind me the name of the program.
Help or Hope?
Is that what it was? I thought you mentioned one the other day, but essentially where my wife is a reporter. She was at the U.S.-Mexico border last year. Maybe this was in 2022, and she's a Spanish speaker, so she's talking to people coming through, and she would see that Border Patrol would allow Venezuelans to come through and basically direct them to different places.
You're thinking about the CHVN.
Yeah,
that's a program. Yeah, basically what the Biden administration, again, this is these complex things that they set up a program in January of 2023 called the CHVN, which would allow immigrants 30,000 per month to come.
Well, this is let me say this is still illegal immigration. You're talking about legal immigration. I'm talking about illegal. Least, yeah, I'm talking about illegal, where the U.S. Clearly gave Border Patrol agents instructions to, depending on the nationality of the migrant, to either allow them in or deny them, or send them to just facilitate their entry into the country, and that's it. Or in the case of Venezuelans, and then with other countries, say like Mexicans or from El Salvador or something like that, they would be sent for processing and this kind of thing. So
that is basically, that is again the undermining that's been going on since the 80s, before you were born, when the U.S. has always been using the immigrants or the refugees from Cuba and now Venezuela to give them basically a base here in the United States, mostly Miami. And so that's what that is. Yeah, the illegals. And back in the 80s, they called it wet foot, dry foot. That is, a lot of the Cubans would get here and they'd be saying, oh, yeah, or Cuba, oh, yeah, that's terrible dictatorship. You can come in. The Haitians would arrive, send you right back. So that's the double standard going on since the last 50 years.
So so this was a very interesting point that I saw you point out in a different interview, Dan. And so the idea being that, what do you guys think what the mindset is here? Why? And you pointed out in the other interview, the idea that, as we've also, and this again, the eating animals part will come up in this, it will get to at the end, but the idea of like Aurora in Colorado, and the idea of this, I argue an equally misrepresented story, that there's clearly a gang problem in Aurora in general. It's been talked about for a long time, Venezuelan gangs, but then all of a sudden we get these stories, which at best I've not been able to prove or verify that what they claim is true. In many cases, the complete opposite, or false completely, but that they've taken over these apartment buildings. And I see these narratives flood. So what's the logic in your mind of why they would say, yes, Haitians, yes, Venezuelans come in these areas, and we should point out clearly, as I think the idea of bringing 20,000 people in a city of 40,000, a little bit less, is crazy in any context. Like that's not even to get into how these are being lied about. But do you think, I guess two parts, why do you think their mindset is, and do you think that's a deliberate destabilization within the United States?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's to destabilize domestically and in Haiti itself. In Haiti, so again, you can bring in a labor pool, people who are willing to do cheap menial labor that the domestic population maybe doesn't want to do anymore, or whatever it is. And then you can also say, look how destabilized that country is. We better send in our troops to go fix it. So it creates the pretext for some kind of intervention, whether political or military. And then domestically, it's a convenient enemy and scapegoat. And I mean, part of it is, I think, when you destabilize a country and bring in the population or some segment of the population, the vast majority of the people are going to be, I think, decent, hardworking, just want to survive. But certainly you will get elements that are criminal in nature. And even there may be even people who were gainfully employed or were in their home country, but when they leave, they go to a country that they're not from. They don't speak the language. They don't have the same sort of social network. They don't have their family around, and they fall into criminal activity. I mean, I've friends of mine who have migrated from Colombia, for example, because of threats to their lives. I talk to them, and they describe that all the time. That people they've known that they go to whatever other country, go to the U.S., they get into drugs, they get into drinking. They leave their wives, this, that, and that's a common thing. So it's natural kind of immigration where people move back and forth for whatever reason, I think is one thing. But when you're just basically burning down countries, whether intentional or not, you're going to have an impact domestically, and that can of course be exploited in a number of ways politically.
And I'd add really quickly that to what you're saying, Dan, that this would exist no matter what grouping of people. Like if you bring 20,000 people from literally anywhere, whatever skin color, whatever location or religion, you're going to find people like that may have, you're going to find bad people in any group of that size. But I agree with you that by and large, that's, the opposite is what we're seeing. And that's this. So do you have any comments on that, Kim, before I ask the next question?
No, you go right ahead.
So I just want to ask, again, I guess the same question. So what do you think the reason is for that? Is this just a byproduct to take advantage of? So the same point, if you're going to choose to bring Venezuelans in and treat them differently and in a rapid influx versus other groups from other countries, and do so in such a ridiculous way no matter where they're from, to bring that many people into one location. So what do you think the point is? What are they trying to accomplish? Either of you.
Yeah, I don't. My personal feeling is that these are unintended consequences. That is, the Aurora Venezuelan gang. I don't think they wanted that or precisely planned that, but it happened. It's it's blowback, as you say. And one thing to remember is, like, let's take the case of Cuba, where basically it was run by the mafia before Fidel took over. So just like they did with the Nazis after World War II, they import a lot of the criminal elements of the Nazi high command, of the Nazi scientists, the same way they imported a lot of the people who'd been working for the mafia, a lot of criminals, into the U.S. to use them against Fidel. And so you ended up getting these gangs, Alpha 66 and Omega and et cetera, who would be to some extent almost out of control, and even doing things that were provocative, that maybe even didn't have the green light from the CIA or something. So I think that this is happening on a larger level too. Same thing with the Venezuelans. I cannot imagine, I don't have any evidence of that, but I cannot imagine that they're trying to get as many Venezuelan discontents and gusanos, as they're called in Cuba, to be able to
Escualidos in Venezuela.
Okay, escualidos. Okay, yeah, right.
Yeah, Venezuela. Yeah,
that they can use against the Venezuelans. So this is the thing. You control. You have basically these thugs, which you have to keep control of. They're useful, but sometimes they get out of control. So to me, that's the dynamic going on here. But overall, the vast majority of the immigrants, are mostly really, I could say, extraordinary people, because they pick up their lives in their country where they'd much prefer to be, to come here to start a new one. And most of them are more upright than any American citizens that I know.
And well, to be clear, I think that's important for people to hear. But what I wasn't even necessarily asking about like a bad element, just an organic grouping of 20,000 people, right? So I find it interesting that it would be so deliberate, that they would as Dan's highlighting, that this would be a pick and choose, selective based on the country. I find that to be hard to ignore, that if they're making that choice, I think that there must be some political reason there. And then the idea being that why have so many go into a city of such a small a number of people? Like, to me, that seems like a deliberate choice. Like, for example, in the political paradigm that I'll call the two-party illusion, people would argue that this, from a Democrat perspective, would be about votes. I don't see that being very logical today, but there's opinions around that. So do we think there's anything there? Like, I just don't get the logic of dumping that many people in a small city. Why wouldn't it be spread out?
No, they're not dumping them. What it is economics. That is, the Haitians arrive and they're going to the places with the cheapest rents and the most jobs. Okay. Indianapolis has like 500,000 Haitians. Indianapolis, Indiana. You don't hear about that, but
right. That makes sense.
Springfield is just another example of it. So the Haitians have been flooding to the areas of opportunity. I mean, Haitians are in almost every city in the U.S. I was in Boise, Idaho about a decade ago, and I was in my hotel room and I heard Haitian Creole down the hallway. I went down and said, "What are you doing here?" And it turned out there's a community of like 300 Haitians living outside of Boise, Idaho. You don't get more white bread than that. And, they come in and they clean the hotels in Boise. So you have Haitians looking for jobs, for opportunity anywhere. And so that's why they end up. So I don't think, this is something conceived of in that respect. Sometimes they'll resettle communities. I've heard, that's how a lot of the Eritreans and Ethiopians ended up maybe up in Minneapolis and stuff like that. But that's pretty rare. I think the Haitians, they come in through Miami or New York, and then they go to wherever the rents are. I mean, you can get a house in Indianapolis, 3 bedrooms and a garage for $1,500. You can't get a studio apartment here in New York for that. So that's what's going on.
I mean, you're kind of, I think what you're touching on, Ryan, is the bigger geopolitical strategy. Like, I mean, basically, I think it's to eliminate sovereignty in other countries. So I mean, look at the countries that are not demonized. Guatemala, El Salvador. I mean, now there's some kind of back and forth, but Mexico is demonized because now they have I mean, I don't know about the new president, but AMLO is not exactly under the thumb of the United States. So but the country like Colombia, Colombia, Mexico, El Salvador, huge amounts of migrants have been from there, and that's been advantageous basically for the ruling class in the United States to have this massive labor pool. And everywhere you go throughout the United States, there is there are huge Latino communities, and their countries are have basically been destroyed in many ways, and not like there's no life in any of those countries, but they have not had sovereignty. Their economies have been completely shaped and designed by U.S. neoliberal economics, and so that's the same thing that the U.S. wants to impose on Nicaragua, for example, to get its population to flee. It's just like destroy all of them, have their people come here. And then send your shape the economy so they're completely dependent on the United States. Have World Bank and IMF policies, have them in huge amounts of debt, basically to reimpose like a new form of slavery, I think is really what this is about. So the countries that resist that are going to be demonized, and the U.S. is going to do everything possible to destabilize them and get portions of their population to leave the country.
Right.
Yeah. Dan, if I can just jump in there, and because I have to jump out. But this goes back to where when I did Bitter Cane back in 1983, we were looking at this. This was the beginning of the bifurcation of the U.S. economy to where we just did services here, and all our production was sent overseas. So we sent it to Latin America. Haiti was one of the first cases where they started to go get the cheap labor. That's what Bitter Cane looks into very deeply. But once they saw it work there, they started to send it to Costa Rica, Nicaragua before the revolution, Honduras, throughout. and then also Mexico, and of course China. China was great for them at the beginning. But now what's begun to happen is that the former vassal, we could call them prison colony cheap labor, are starting to rebel. China, Mexico too, to some extent, Brazil. So all the empire is shaking with trouble, and that's the Global Fragility Act. Is okay, we're going to make it easy for them. We're going to put our military base there, because that's what the Global Fragility Act calls for, and then we're going to put them on a lifeline of U.S. surplus food, corn, rice, wheat, etc. They don't have to worry about the food. We're going to feed you. We got you by the belly. We got you. And that's the idea.
Yeah. I mean, and this is such a classic. I mean, not even to get into the idea of the terrible, GMOs, whatever else they're probably going to send over there. The idea of the classic U.S. policy, or, like Confessions of an Economic Hitman, the understanding there of the debt part of it, but really that it comes down to, as you're highlighting, that you create a situation where you act like it's help, but ultimately you set it up to where they're so overly reliant on the U.S. or other Western interests for what they need to survive, and they ultimately end up producing what the U.S. government demands of them, and so that rug can be pulled at the moment they're no longer advantageous. And it's such an obvious ongoing part of this history, and so that's why all of this is so infuriating to watch this get boiled down to the most absurd, cartoonish allegations about eating animals and, voodoo and all these things that are, there's some elements of that could be pointed to around the world, but this conversation has gotten so cartoonish. And so I guess let's get into that to sort of kind of, fine tune this. And if you have to jump out, let me know.
Yeah, that's me. Yeah, I gotta run. But yeah, it's been a very invigorating discussion, and I'm sure Dan will hold the fort, as it were, in my absence. But yes. Thanks very much, Ryan, for having us.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us, and let's connect again in the future.
Okay, so long.
Well, Dan, since we can go into, let me ask you one more question, actually, before we jump into the idea of the kind of, and what your thoughts on why that story is coming up and what they're trying to hide. But like in regard, one of my point about the weaponized immigration or migration part, do you see, or just in general with Haiti, do you have any insight or thoughts on Israel's involvement? There's a famous example, or a very widely known example of a billionaire named, where is it?
Gilbert Biggio.
Yeah, and the influence there, and just your thoughts on that, because there's a very open conversation for those listening. My work has shown this clearly. I mean, there's like think tanks writing like, I guess, scientific outlines about the use of this or weaponized migration, Israel being one of them, even allegations right now about how they're using the Gaza population. So in my opinion, it's an undeniable fact that empires have used weaponized migration throughout the world going back a long way. Now, it's debatable in some people's minds about whether that's part of what's happening here and so on. But I wanted your thoughts on the idea of Israel's involvement in that, or just the destabilization of Haiti, wherever you'd like to go with that.
Yeah, I have not looked deeply into Israeli involvement in Haiti, and that's something that I would like to do. I mean, Gilbert Biggio, I think, is the single richest man in Haiti. I think an ardent Zionist. Mm-hmm. So, and if you look at the history prior to the Aristide years, during the Duvalier dictatorship, I think there are some ties to Israel then, whether, weapons training, something like that. And certainly, in the region, Israel has an extremely bloody history, whether in Colombia, which I've written about extensively there, in Cuba. I mean, Israel's even involved in Cuba, all over the place, in genocides and other things. So, it's a good question that I don't know a whole lot about. When I was in Haiti last time I was there was February of this year. I took we were in one of the kind of we're in kind of one of the popular neighborhoods, not in the wealthy areas, one of the kind of poorer neighborhoods, and near the port. And I saw a big business that on its big metal gate had a huge Israeli flag painted on it. And I was trying to figure out what it was. I was asking contacts and just Googling, and I could not figure out anything. And, I didn't spend like huge amounts of time looking into it, but, that's a great question. Why is this Israeli flag painted on this big business? So I don't know. It's a great question. Yeah, I wish I knew.
Well, yeah, I think it's important people to look into the history around I mean, generally, just from a global perspective, the idea of weaponized migration and how that's been used over long periods of time to influence. I mean, I frankly think that's part of what we're seeing in this country and outside as well. And I just think it's important for people to see these other strings like we're highlighting with the United States government. I mean, I think right now for a lot of people in the world, the history of U.S. foreign intervention, destabilization, regime change, occupation is a despite the childish denials from U.S. government, it's like everybody's very aware of that. And I think Israel's played a major role in those over the years as well, which is starting to come out more and more. So yeah, I definitely will include these these in the notes for people to look further into. But the interesting part of a Zionist sort of being one of the richest people in the world, but influential in Haiti in particular for such a long period of time is just fascinating to me. So let's end with that part I was asking there in regard to why. Why do you think with this, we saw this kind of spin out of control at the where was that the debate where Trump said they're eating the animals, and it was very flimsy from where it started. And my research into this showed that there is an interesting overlap around different things you might have seen in Brooklyn, for example. There's a weird history of animal sacrifice in different cemeteries and things that like even protected aspects of different, but it seems to be very minute and it got turned into this really international story out of nowhere. And so I wanted your thoughts on the validity of that story in general, and specifically Springfield, or rather just Ohio in general, and the use in the debate, and why you think that might have come up, and overlapping with we mentioned Jimmy Barbecue and the story there of cannibalism. And, is there a thread here? Like, why do you think that's being used?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the recent, I would call hysteria about Haitians eating animals. It seems to me like just a campaign strategy for the Trump campaign that was cooked up probably with Elon Musk, whoever is advising Trump's campaign, because of course now that Elon Musk is the owner of X. Or the front man for X, or whatever he is. I mean, there's a huge amount of kind of influencers that are paid through his whole there's the subscription thing, and then the ad revenue, and only some accounts will get ad revenue depending on if your content is ad revenue friendly. So many of those accounts, the Ian Michaels Chongs of the world, and these guys make tens of thousands of dollars per month. So they can basically, Elon can, it looks like, just hand out a directive. Okay, everyone promote these Haitians eating cat and dog memes, and he's in with the Trump campaign. So it's firmly on the side of Trump, whereas the more mainstream media, the CNNs and New York Times, are obviously on the side of the Kamala Harris campaign. So yeah, I mean, the stories that of these alleged Haitians eating cats, well, they were totally phony to start with. I mean, the one that went viral was happened the month before, in another, not in Springfield, Ohio, I think in Canton, Ohio, and it was a woman who was actually not even Haitian, but that became a huge thing. And then there was another
and she was
image
local.
of
She was actually from Ohio, right? As well
exactly.
As I don't know whether it's ever proven that she actually ate it. That was just shouted in the video that we never verified.
Right. And then the other one was like some guy carrying a goose. And I think, the origin of it was like he was actually, or, it turned out he was actually like helping the goose or something like that. And he wasn't even Haitian. It was, just some photo from Reddit. So it's all just totally absurd, and it just gets turned into these viral memes and hysteria. And, it just became like this is okay, obviously for Trump to talk about, and then he talked about it at the debate. Oh, in Springfield, they're talking about, or they're eating the pets, they're eating the cats, and the thing is, they don't want to talk about it becomes a proxy for a real issue. So but it's like a dog whistle. And so it's a proxy for a real issue, which is, migration and economics and the depression of middle America and what's actually happening. And so there is a part of it that's real, even though it's factually incorrect.
Right.
And so, of course, Kamala Harris is just going to say, "Oh, you're crazy. That's racist." But she's not going to address what's actually going on. The real thing that it's a proxy for. Like all the media that went out to immediately debunk Trump, and JD Vance, all the mainstream media, these are the same media outlets that like lie us into wars and about Russiagate and every other thing all the time. And they also don't want to talk about the actual issues, of the decline of the middle class. So, it's, to me, it's like Trump, the right wing basically wants to talk about, doesn't want to talk about the root, but does want to talk about the symptom. And the liberal class doesn't want to talk about the root or the symptom, but they just want to, portray anyone who does get hepped up on this, on these lies about the symptoms as a racist. And certainly those memes are like playing on racist tropes. And there's a long kind of, we were talking about before how kind of Haiti occupies the American imagination as this, nation of savages, and it's just so easy to play into that. But I don't think it's a winning strategy overall. Again, it's just playing to Trump's base, and it's a mostly online phenomenon. Unless you're like on Twitter, are you going to know what he's talking about with, these cats and, Haitians eating cats? It's like, that doesn't really address the material reality that most people are living on. And, the thing is, if there was a real nationalist movement in the United States, like if MAGA wasn't being led by, con men, neocons and con men, and then, they could look at Haiti and say, hey, there is a movement there led by this guy, Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier, who does want to improve his country and reverse the migration flow and develop and have mutually beneficial relations with the United States. But everyone's too hepped up on, the right is too hepped up on all this stupid propaganda, because fundamentally they're the same as the liberals. They just want to control and dominate and destroy. So it's just the two wings of the uniparty. But it's I hope it's a failing strategy, honestly. I hope Haiti is able to actually, this kind of revolutionary movement that we documented in our film Another Vision, and then we did like an update that we released in April or May called Haiti Intervention and Revolution. I hope they succeed and they can actually develop the country, and hopefully enough of us in the United States will come to our senses at some point that we can join the rest of the world.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and your point there, it's interesting because it highlights the idea of like what will work for the different campaigns, but I still come back to the larger point that, of my mind, it is a uniparty. And in my mind, that extends to everything, including the supposed election that we're about to go into. And so what I see this as is what I wrote here in regard to what Jimmy Dore pointed this out in regard to something you've commented on, JD Vance, and the conversation around this, where he simply says the part you're leaving out is that those Haitian refugees are created by the oligarchs, Western economic hitman, and imperialism, which we've discussed today. But here's the part that I think Jimmy left out, which is why I think this will never, it's why you're saying they won't address it, or they're both ignoring the real point. I think this is why. I said, great point, Jimmy, and therein lies the two-party illusion grift. They'll never address it since all sides have an interest in maintaining the foreign policy and immigration pipeline, which we discussed today. They turn us against ourselves, which only benefits the power structure and maintains the status quo. Now, Kim felt that there wasn't necessarily a organized effort to do that, but I think it's worth considering that this, even if it is just a byproduct, that it is in fact being even allowed and ignored, because it does have a benefit for both sides of the paradigm. Even if there are genuine disagreements or differences or fighting, that at the end of the day, the uniparty does have a central interest that I think that meets. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I think at least we could ask him, but I think what Kim thought was not orchestrated is like where migrants, land, where which cities they end up in, that kind of thing. But definitely in terms of the overall strategy, I mean, I think though, even, at that level of where migrants land, I mean, with regular people, I think they land where there's opportunity, and as Kim pointed out, there are jobs and prices are low, so they're not going to be like living in Marin County in California or wherever. I don't know, who knows? People just show up wherever there's work. But I mean, you do have to wonder about with criminal networks. I mean, it's no secret that criminal networks are tied to intelligence agencies. It's not like they're just totally organic. And so, say if, I don't know, there's some desirable piece of land or some real estate that BlackRock wanted to buy up. Hey, why not send some criminal like networks to go destabilize it and get people to move out and want to sell their property. And then then you can swoop in and buy it all up. I'm not saying there's evidence of that, but objectively it plays out that way. So I think definitely the broader strategy is totally intentional, and you certainly have to wonder about it at the kind of the lower level.
Right. Well, see, to me, this overlaps with an interesting part of the story, and this goes into why the many reasons you outlined, and anybody that has objectivity and willing to do their due diligence, that there's, I mean, far more outright lies and misinformation and old stories being lumped on top of this narrative right now. But what's interesting to me is it turned out this, and this is from the New Republic, that before the debate, before the conversation, there was a group I'm sure you're familiar with called the Blood Tribe, which, I'll be quite honest, my opinion is that it's very obviously influenced by whether the FBI or intelligence, same as Patriot Front. That's my opinion. But ultimately, it turns out that they were spreading these same sentiments going back well before. This is posted on September 10th. But the point, I went too far. There we go. The point is that this actually was stated before that. This is one of the members of the Blood Tribe speaking, guess what? Springfield City Commission meeting, which is exactly the same as the one that went viral. Not the same guy. I don't even think it's connected. But here's a guy speaking at that exact same thing right before this, saying about the ducks and so on. And so I find it fascinating that this, you could argue this effectively started before all of that, coming from some of these, what they're calling neo-Nazi groups, which clearly they are, but whether that's really the origin of it, I just thought that was fascinating. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, you hit it on the head. That's exactly it. You have to wonder how much of this is actually just totally coordinated and planned out. And yeah, I mean, so many of these white supremacist groups are actually just controlled by feds and are just useful idiots, and do the bidding of of the uniparty. So that's exactly it. Like I had seen that video. I haven't actually watched it. It was just like, oh, of course, So I mean, it's just infuriating, like you said before, how banal this all gets, and how manipulative and I don't know. I just like I kind of hate Twitter now. I mean, it's like I almost prefer the old censorship regime, the more liberal censorship regime, because it was like more in your face, and now it's just like cat memes and guys like thanking Trump for thanking Elon Musk for restoring free speech, and it's just like this is well, even censoring. Well censoring, and Elon Musk is like oh, there's freedom of speech but not freedom of reach. So it's like, okay, so if they don't like what you say, then you're just going to be shadow banned. So it's like a more insidious form of censorship. And and it's really sophisticated. I mean, I think like you have to look at accounts. Even I think there's also continuity between the old Twitter regime. I mean, this is not directly related to the Haiti thing, but I think it's worth considering when we look at just these information operations. There's continuity between, of course, the old Twitter regime and the current Twitter regime, where accounts that were banned are back, but how many of those accounts were banned in order to kind of give them credibility? So when they come back, oh, the narrative they're promoting must be subversive. I'm trying to think of his name in Germany, the guy who wrote like The New Normal and is being prosecuted by the German courts. It's killing me. I can't think of his name, but he made that point. If you ever saw the movie The Departed, where and Leonardo DiCaprio is he's a cop, and they send him to jail for a while to basically, give him credibility as a criminal so he can infiltrate. And it's that kind of thing. Like, it's not that sophisticated, but I think people, often kind of take it for granted. So I think the kind of the disinformation operations and the kind of social media control apparatus has become more sophisticated, and it rebranded very well under Elon Musk. And so, but I think it becomes so clear how coordinated so much of it is. For one thing, when you see these, Haitian cat memes, how obvious that is, that it's, just to support Trump. And then the other thing that I look at all the time is, like, I don't know if it's just, the algorithm that's pumped into my feed, but I see so much like just Jew hatred all the time. Jews this, it's the Jews, it's the Jews, since October 7th, since, this genocide kicked off. And I mean, the main thing for me is, well, this is a product of Zionism. Like, these things, like some guy blaming Jews would just be some like whack job in the corner if it wasn't for the quote unquote Jewish state doing all of these things in the name of Jews. And so then it gains traction. But when I think of, like, okay, someone says it's the Jews, whatever, and they get like 5 or 10,000 retweets and 70,000 likes or whatever, I'm like, wait a minute. But Elon Musk said that, if they don't like it, then he's gonna soft censor it. It's you don't have freedom of reach. So that's intentional, that stuff like that is being given freedom of reach, that it's not being suppressed. In fact, it's being promoted. And it's basically to support the whole notion, the Zionist notion, that Jews equal Israel. And so as long as you're staying within this paradigm of whether you believe one way that it's good or bad, like if you're a Zionist and you believe, oh, this is the Jewish state and we have to kill all those Palestinians and everything they're doing, blowing up, cell phones in Lebanon, that's good, then you're fine. And if you believe that the Jews are Israel, then you're fine, because you're not questioning, you're not going to get censored on Twitter. Or if you do, it will be like, Lucas Gage, who was like censored. He was suspended for like 3 weeks and then brought back. And it's like, well, I've never seen anyone temporarily have their account suspended. Where they announce that, like, you're suspended for 3 weeks or 6 weeks or 6 months or whatever. It's like, if you're suspended, you're suspended. That's what I've always seen. I've never seen anyone other than outright neo-Nazis have that, where they're temporarily suspended. And that's the Leonardo DiCaprio thing, where to establish credibility, when really what they're doing is supporting Zionism. So totally kind of off track, but this is the bigger picture, I think.
No, it's since you bring it up, it's fascinating, and I agree. I think it's very deliberate, and I'm very much with you on the reality of Zionism and how it uses Judaism. And the point being that, to your excellent point there, is I hadn't even thought about the idea that essentially, by the statement that freedom of reach, not speech, or speech not reach, the idea is that you're saying that then that must mean that they're allowing this to get the reach that it would, or boosting it. And so that's support, but also that Yacarino and Elon have said that they're working with the ADL, that they're going to remove things. And so yet, how does that make sense? And I think exactly where this is going, is that it makes sense because that is Zionism and how it works. The creation of that. And I would say not just hyping what you pointed out, but also making it look as if the problem of anti-Semitism is much larger than it actually is, which is how they maintain their presence. And obviously there is racism, and that's your point. If it wasn't for the way they were using this, I agree, it would be regarded as it would in any normal say. You're a gross person, you can say whatever you want over there, and it's interesting that is, I think that's a huge part of it. And to bring it back to what we're saying today, we saw with Venezuela, with Musk and like, look, free speech is absolute. I will always draw that line, whether it's Musk or an oligarch or a billionaire military contractor. You have a right to free speech, but the moment that it crosses the line where he is a government contractor, he's about to be on a cabinet for the presidency. So at what point, and maybe even right now, does that become a state action? Does that change the dynamic of what he's doing? And I think we all kind of sense and see his interest, maybe lithium, I don't know, but clearly an interest in acting against Maduro when all of a sudden, you look back at his history on his account, there was no engagement of Venezuela and just on a dime. Right. He's just all about it. And so this brings back the memes and the cat, all of this stuff. I definitely, my personal opinion, see a coordinated effort here. And that, and this goes back to a lot of these conversations. And I personally, even taking it one step further back, see this as sort of this technocratic push. And we don't have to get into this if you don't like, but the idea of like the different dynamics of governance around the world. And I go back to Honduras and Prospera, or as you highlighted with these kind of new structures they're using to sort of take control. Maybe these are all trial balloons, in different ways to test these things out. It's quite alarming to me. So you can comment on it if you'd like. And I'd like to end with the idea of, the Jimmy barbecue aspect of this and how, really just the overarching idea. And I'll bring up these tweets about, why why did this begin in your mind right here at this point? Why was this sudden point, Alex Jones, the rest of them, and the voodoo and the eating animals, and he's a cannibal. Like, why was that plucked out? Is that just because of Haiti and the past there? And, your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. All of these are, different trials. It's, different testing grounds. I mean, like there are a lot of different places that have been kind of described as laboratories for, Gaza is a laboratory for Israeli weapons, where the West Bank is a laboratory for Israeli repression. And then that's exported around. Haiti is always kind of, because of its vanguard role, is always a laboratory for, imperial shenanigans. Even, I think Greg Grandin wrote a book called The Empire's Workshop, and about Latin America. So it's everywhere is basically a laboratory, and depending on the specific and unique countries or conditions of different countries, they'll try something else. So definitely, what you're talking about, this Prospera thing in Honduras, which I mean I've only looked into a little bit, but it sounds wild. I mean, I think actually that the thing that, if we weren't so focused on these stupid cat stories, there's a bigger picture that I think, looking at Haiti, Haiti is always at the vanguard. It's always at the forefront of like what's coming. Whether, Kim was describing that with the Haitian Revolution of 1804, right. With the Pink Tide, it was the first left-wing leader elected in Latin America, before Chavez or Morales or any of those guys. And like when you go to Haiti, you basically see that there is no middle class. The vast majority live in extreme poverty. A tiny few live in opulent wealth, where, I mean, it was shocking for me to go up into the hills above Port-au-Prince, into Pétionville, it's called, and areas around there where, I mean, it's like Beverly Hills style mansions. With, I showed this in a piece I did for Redacted, but I took my drone and just flew it around, and these huge rolling hills with massive mansions and swimming pools and helicopter pads, and I was just like shocked. And then, the slums on lower down are basically just living in varying degrees of poverty and literal filth and excrement, because the sewage, there's the canals where like sewage and trash drain just go down, and the further you are down, and basically the lower your socioeconomic class is, the more garbage and excrement pile up. And the government, because it basically doesn't exist thanks to the US, right, doesn't dredge these canals anymore. So like in an area like Cité Soleil, which I saw these like white supremacist accounts claiming this is a Haitian village. This is what Haitians do. They just live in garbage. And it's a total dystopian, landscape where it's just literally garbage everywhere and tin shacks. Well, that's what has been created, and
Right.
that's what I see is that's what they want to do in the United States. That's what they want to do to us. They want to just extract all the wealth, have people live in the worst conditions possible, where they, have low life expectancy, where they'll work at best, in sweatshop labor conditions, where some of them will get into criminal activity to basically keep each other down and fight. I mean, that's not a unique thing to Haiti. This is a thing. All these people who are saying, "Oh, it's because Haitians, their IQ is 67." It's like, no, you are carrying water for the
Right.
Clinton Foundation that you claim to oppose. This is
Right.
because of the conditions that Haiti has been subjected to by the same ruling class that is destroying our country. So,
Right.
you're just their little tool. So the real thing to do is understand what's actually how Haiti got to that point and how similar processes are playing out here, and to look at, well, okay, how is Haiti removing itself from this position, improving its conditions? And one of the ways is this guy, Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier, who was smeared on X earlier this year as a cannibal, even though that was totally false.
Mhm.
And, really, he's a guy who's, there's been like so many movies in the US about like a cop, a do-gooder cop who's trying to, do good within the system, and then he gets burned. And so that's who Cherizier is. There's like the movie Serpico from like the 70s, I think.
Mhm.
There's, like, I don't know. Kim, I was talking to Kim about it a couple days ago. He's like, it's like the Wild West in Haiti.
Hmm.
The demarcations between, state and non-state are not totally clear. Who the good guys are, who the bad guys are. So you can have, so-called gangs or, non-state armed groups that are popular, that are doing good things for the people. And that's what Cherizier, and you can have corrupt police. And that's what
Right.
Cherizier, he was in the corrupt police trying to do his best, and they burned him, and he became basically a revolutionary. And so he's
Mhm.
trying to unite these different neighborhoods to have a revolution against these criminals in suits and ties. And that's why he's being demonized. That's why, he's on Twitter, they call him a cannibal and all of these things. So it's a very interesting process that's playing out. And I really wish more independent journalists would go check it out, honestly.
Right.
I mean, I've been really privileged to do it since 2021, when after the president of Haiti was assassinated, Jovenel Moise, and I called Kim, who I knew before, and we headed down there not long after, and that turned into this documentary, which I didn't, plan. And but there are very, 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 there are really no other journalists I know who go down there to like see what's going on. And I really encourage it. So, it's so eye-opening. And Haiti, I mean, it's an amazing country too. It's not, despite what the pictures on Twitter show, it's a fascinating place and deserves a lot more attention.
Yeah. And who knows what it could actually be if it wasn't being stepped on for so long by Western foreign policy, And so that's actually why I wanted to bring this up to end, is that it brings it full circle, right? Is that as Kim was describing in the beginning, or of the discussion we're having, that now we see Jimmy and others beginning to, I think a lot of countries in the world that are under Western suppression and foreign policy are seeing this opening as well. Whether it's because of Zionism's collapse or other diminishing power structure and influence, there's other places that are going, okay, we have an opening here to actually fight for our interests. And I think that's what we're seeing in Haiti. And I think that's why this is being kicked off, the cannibal. And it's just lazy dehumanization, right? I mean, as well as many other things I'm sure we could point out. But I think this is the dying gas, the desperation, the cornered animal, whatever analogy we want to use here, where we see the Western, specifically U.S. government foreign policy, losing its influence and desperately trying to maintain that power as others begin to recognize an opening to fight for their own determination. Gaza, whatever else we're talking about here, And so it's important that I think that people take what you're saying to heart and consider this. And as you said, if you're a journalist, maybe go look at it for yourself instead of parroting images from people and, oligarch government contractors on Twitter, to make sure we're thinking for ourselves. So, thank you for breaking this all down for us. I think this is such an important conversation. On the way out, I wanted your thought on one thing that I sent you a second before the interview started. And I just saw it. It's breaking news. I wanted your thoughts on if this is relevant and maybe just a random event. Unidentified gunmen kill high-ranking migration official in Haiti's biggest cities. This is from today. So, any thoughts on that? I'm sure you don't have time to look into it or anything, but just it's an interesting that it's a migration official and what that is, and any thoughts?
Yeah, I do not know anything about it. I just saw the headline you sent me right before we started.
Mm-hmm. Sorry to spring it on you. I just thought it was interesting.
No, it's okay. I mean, it is a good question. Okay, I will say Cap Haitian, which is in the north of the country. This is where that happened. Is a much more stable area than Port-au-Prince. I mean, they don't really have quote unquote gangs there. They did before. I think they've been pretty much eliminated. Kim and I were there in I think in February. During this last trip, we went to Cap Haitian and we met with this group called BASAP, which is basically like environmental rangers who are kind of with this proto-revolutionary ideology, and the government has tried to disband because they can't control them. So it may be a way to try to destabilize Cap Haitian and the kind of northwest of the country. So beyond that, I have no idea. It's a great question.
Well, thank you for your opinion on it, your insight on that. And I think that I feel like one of the things that jumped in my head was similar is that just the expanding of the effort, or whether it becomes relevant that he's a migration officer or not. Well, I'm sure I'll cover this in future shows, but same thing. I just really think that people need to step outside of their paradigm, the political lens they're looking through, and consider what it really means to have your tax dollars, your governments acting on your behalf, literally destroying, destabilizing, pillaging foreign countries for no one's interest other than themselves, and typically for something outside of even our own country. We're talking about globalist entities or something else. So I recommend you all take a look at Dan's work, his documentaries. We'll include all this in the show notes. Thank you for being here, Dan. I really enjoyed the conversation, as much as it's a tough topic. Anything else you want to leave for us on the way out? Any upcoming work or final thoughts?
No, just working hard on some unannounced, undisclosed projects, but hopefully we'll have some. I'll have an announcement soon. But no, just want to thank you, Ryan, for having me on, having Kim on, and the platform, and look forward to doing it again.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. And as always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.